So welcome back. My name is Luke McBain. I'm here with Chad McBain, and we're talking about Bitcoin. Hi, Chad. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
Great. I'm actually followed your advice, and I got the Bitcoin Standard, this little book here, and it is really it's really a great read. First of all, and it's very compelling, and it makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of really valuable information in this book. So I think your recommendation for anybody interested in Bitcoin to go out and yeah, buy it or lend it or borrow it from somebody. So that's pretty neat. And I thought also that the what we touched upon in the first session, this which is really well explained, is also this technical aspect. And I thought maybe I just kick it off today, the discussion, by reading a little bit from this technical aspect, because it again has ramifications on all sorts of things like security and the environment, and why does Bitcoin use up so much energy? Because you always hear, oh, it uses like the energy like a small country, and so this is something bad, and why is that even necessary? Um, so I'll just read a couple of sentences, and then we'll see what to do with that. So here he writes, in order for a node to commit a block of transactions to the ledger, so transaction in terms of Bitcoin transactions, it has to expend processing power on solving complicated mathematical problems that are hard to solve, but whose correct solution is easy to verify. This is the proof of work system. So every time you hear something about proof of work, this is why it's called proof of work. And I think he has this analogy of when you want to I don't know, send an email or enter a password. Sometimes you have to solve a small puzzle, right? Like
Right.
click on all the pictures which have a car in them or something. You go like, why is
Yeah.
this happening?
Yeah.
Why do I have to do that? So that's like proof of work. Like you have to do some work and expend some time and energy to get actually logged in, and this prevents or is supposed to prevent also from bots doing the same thing and solving these problems. And so that's why there's these mathematical problems here which need to be solved. And only with a correct solution can a block be committed and verified by all network members. And there's a second part. So they all have to, these blocks, which contain the transactions, these Bitcoin transactions, have to be verified by all members or a majority of members. While these mathematical problems are unrelated to the Bitcoin transactions, they are indispensable to the operation of the system, as they force the verifying nodes to expend processing power, which would be wasted if they included fraudulent transactions. Once a node solves the proof of work correctly and announces the transactions, other nodes on the network vote for its validity. And once a majority has voted to approve the block, nodes begin committing transactions to a new block to be appended to the previous one and solving the new proof of work for it. And here it comes. Crucially, that the node that commits a valid block of transactions to the network receives a block reward consisting of brand new Bitcoins added to the supply, along with the transaction fees paid by the people who are transacting. This process is what referred to as mining. So now
Right.
we know how Bitcoin is mined. Like this is
Right.
basically a reward for a block being created, and which contains these transactions, and which must be validated by solving a complex mathematical problem, which has energy expenditure, a proof of work, right? So, and therefore, the Bitcoin network is energy intensive. It requires that
Yeah.
amount of energy. And we've heard a lot, like, I think this year, and that's what we talked about last time, is that Elon Musk said, oh no, Bitcoin is not environmentally friendly. We first have to check this out and now we have to roll back, selling Tesla cars for Bitcoin because we don't know how environmentally friendly Bitcoin is. Although it turns out it is much more environmentally friendly than commonly suspected. So yeah, I just wanted to start off with that neat quote, and also again say, well, because we talk about Bitcoin mining, how is Bitcoin mined? So this is sort of like the process which is the mining process, and
Right.
why it needs so much electricity.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, the amount of electricity being used is obviously is necessary because the mining is what makes sure. Again, I'm speaking in layperson's terms. the mining is what validates and makes sure that there's not manipulation and corruption in the system. And, in our current banking system, I mean, look, you don't need to watch the news or to know how every day all over the world, there's all kinds of fraud committed by the banks, by governments, by individuals, by fund managers, all kinds of stuff. So the cool thing about Bitcoin is you can't manipulate it from that perspective. In regards to the energy, I guess the short answer is, yeah, it uses a lot of energy, but so does everything. I mean, and it's not really the energy that's the problem. It's, well, how is the energy being used and where is it coming from? And that's what seems to be, I mean, it's starting to come out now. We're starting to see people push back against that narrative because it's simply not true that somehow it's bad for the environment. What's bad for the environment actually is our current financial system and the amount of energy that it uses to basically inflate away everybody's purchasing power. Bitcoin, think of it this way, by nature, a miner is an individual or a company. You and I can mine, companies can mine, but at the end of the day, if the reward isn't greater than the expense, you're not going to mine. So just by virtue of, what would you call it, survival, I guess, financial survival, people mining Bitcoin seek out the most economically efficient way to mine. And of course, the most economically efficient way to use energy is to use renewables. And so people can look this up online, regardless of how you do it, Google, Yahoo, Bing, doesn't matter. You'll quickly realize that about 60% of all Bitcoin mining, actually it's higher now, it's actually over 70% of all Bitcoin mining is actually used renewables. I don't know that it's more than maybe 10% of our current financial system that uses renewables. And as it gets more complicated, and again, I don't want to get too technical for people, but every 4 years, the rewards that you get, those block rewards that you commented on, they get cut in half, which kind of automatically forces the people who are mining to get more efficient every 4 years. So right now, if 70 to 75% of people mining are using renewables, it's almost a foregone conclusion that at the next halving, which will be early 2024, by summer of 2024, you could probably bet that 90 to 95% of all Bitcoin mining will be using renewables because the rewards will be cut in half. The difficulty will become more. You'll need more efficient and economic energy. So in a weird way, the bigger Bitcoin gets and the more people use it and the more people come onto the network, if you will, it actually becomes less and less environmentally, as Elon Musk would say, damaging. As a matter of fact, if anything, I'll say this, by the end of this decade, Bitcoin will probably be 99.9% renewable energy all across the network, hundreds of millions of people. So the truth of the matter is, it's far more green than any economic system that we probably have used in the last 500 years.
Mm. Because you can get, actually, I saw an interview, I don't know with who I think you remember which interview I was watching, but there was one person who said, well, you could actually, like, the problem sometimes with renewable energy is where it's located, right? So let's say renewable energy through the sun is, lots of it is in desert regions, far away from any population centers or waterfalls, well, which is not really a problem for a Bitcoin mining operation to set up in the middle of nowhere, just to benefit from that and then generate the resources needed to build up the infrastructure there.
Currently we've got, and this is why we touched on our last discussion, how China getting rid of the miners actually fast tracked the Bitcoin renewable mining probably a year or two faster than it would have been, because it forced people to have to make an economic decision that was more efficient. And so those miners then go to places like the desert in Nevada or Arizona, or they go to Iceland and use the leftover energy from hot springs and stuff like that. They go to Canada and use the leftover energy in Quebec through our water here. We're going down a bit of a rabbit hole, but 80% of the energy that we produce in Canada through the tremendous amount of water that we have here gets wasted, because we create so much energy that we can't use it in our cities. And so we actually sell a lot of our energy for next to nothing to the northern US cities, but even they don't need it all. So, Bitcoin miners are moving to provinces like Ontario and Quebec specifically, because Quebec's a little bit more business friendly. And they're taking this excess energy that was going to be wasted anyway, and they're using it to mine Bitcoin. There's El Salvador, the government in El Salvador is planning on setting up, I don't know if they have yet or not, but they're planning on setting up Bitcoin mining operations next to their volcanoes, because all that energy is wasted. And they use volcanic energy to help power their cities and villages. The problem is, the further you get away from the source, it dissipates very quickly, that energy. So you can't, unless you build a city at the base of a volcano, you lose most of that energy. Well, you don't want to put women and children, and men, women, children, doesn't matter. You don't want to put people at the base of a volcano, but you don't care if you put some computers. It doesn't, if the volcano were to unfortunately erupt, okay, you got to replace some computers. That's a lot better than replacing people. So that 99.9% of that energy that otherwise would have been lost from that volcano is being used to mine Bitcoin. So it's actually, in my opinion, currently fast tracking to become the most green financial system in the history of the world. Yeah.
And coming back to your initial statement, you say our current financial system is actually very inefficient and very wasteful. And I just want to point back to this book again, is what's great about this book, sort of like connects the question of Bitcoin to our financial systems and also to our economies. And I can't agree more when you say, well, our current financial system is extremely wasteful. If you think about, it's just a stupid idea to have money sitting around and not spending it or not investing it. And if you invest it, you don't know how green that investment is. Right. And spending just so that it's not inflated away. I mean, the whole system set up in such a way that it encourages us actually to spend our money, because next year it's just gonna, you can only buy less with it. Right. And that sort of encourages also some sort of wastefulness and just spending on stuff which we actually don't need. And like another new iPhone, which exactly. Or whatever, just to say, okay, well, let's get rid of the old stuff. I got to get rid of my money. Let's buy some more stuff, get rid of the old stuff. Yeah. And Bitcoin sort of does not encourage that. It sort of like really encourages you to hold on to Bitcoin. Like,
because of a fixed amount, it does. So when if you were to spend your Bitcoin, as you say, you're not going to buy I wouldn't be buying Twinkies or potato chips or something like that with my Bitcoin. I might buy a home, or if I'd had a really good decade, I might buy a boat, but I'd be buying something tangible, I don't even think I'd buy a boat because they devalue so fast. But property, a home, that kind of stuff, yes. But I don't think you're going to spend it on frivolous stuff. I'm certainly not going to buy my next Samsung or iPhone or whatever using Bitcoin, because there's only 21 million. So if I even have a small little piece of that and I spend it on something silly, and I don't want to say vacations are silly, but if there's nothing tangible there, I would want something tangible. I'll spend my fiat currency on my vacation, but I'm not going to spend my Bitcoin on my vacation. I'm not going to spend my Bitcoin on this shirt, because a year or two from now, this shirt's going to be a throwaway anyway, because it's not that high quality and it'll start to basically disintegrate, and I'll just go buy another one for $30, but I'm not going to spend $30 worth of Bitcoin to do it, you know? So if anything, it becomes, as you said, it's a self-fulfilling situation where it becomes the most energy efficient way of conducting finance and trade that we've probably had. I don't want to say ever, probably since we traded, you know, goat's milk for eggs. You know, we were trading tangible stuff for tangible stuff back then. So that was probably more. But ever since we started using coins or paper, and now, you know, the last 20, 30 years, digital, you know, in terms of how we do our banking. Most don't go and transact in bills that much anymore, maybe small bills, 20s and 50s. But so even the digital version of our fiat money is still a tremendous stress on the environment, based on the energy that it uses, that is completely and totally wasted and lost forever. Yeah.
And I think the point after reading this, you go like, you get a little bit excited when reading this book. At least that happened to me. And you go like, oh man, this is the first time in human history, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's just really a fixed amount of something on this planet, which we really know there will be never more. And this is these 21 million Bitcoin. So it's basically the hardest store of value ever created. Like it's something entirely new, which even, as you said, gold or especially silver, but also gold, you know, there's always more gold to be found. Gold is pretty hard in terms of, and rare. But even we can't really verify how much gold there is. It's not, you can't really, but there is only 21 million Bitcoin, or there will be only 21 million Bitcoin. And it's also very unlikely that something else like Bitcoin will be created. Of course, something else might be created. We can't, you know, look entirely into the future. There's always that possibility. But then it would have to be really something different, not something similar, not like these altcoins which are floating around right now. They are not like Bitcoin. It's not the same thing. And that's where you get really excited when you finally understand that idea, that you have this really hard asset basically, which cannot be inflated, which has a high level of security, a high level of trust. So you just sort of turn around and get, why aren't more people excited about this? What's going on? Like everybody should just be, whoa, this is amazing. Yeah.
Well, I you know, that's a whole conversation in itself. But I think if I'm being fair, and let's avoid conspiracy theories, if we're fair, Bitcoin really wasn't released to the world until about 2009. You know, it took a year to two for it to get past, you know, the cypherpunks, the den of nerds that were playing with it, into more mainstream. And I don't mean mainstream as in global adoption. I mean mainstream as in somebody outside of that core group actually paying attention to it. So if we look at it in that sense, it's so young and so new. I think people are getting excited about it, but I think it just needs more and more time. But when you see what happened last month in the United States, where this 2,700-page bill that needed to get passed was held up for, I think, 3 or 4 days because of basically one line about cryptocurrency and how it was going to be treated. When you had 40,000 phone calls to US senators saying, you don't know what you're talking about, whether or not it went one way or the other isn't really the point. My point is, could you imagine, even 5 years ago, the United States Senate being held up for days because of what the skeptics would call this fake internet money, is now holding up the U.S. Senate on a must-pass infrastructure bill. So I think it is becoming more mainstream and people are getting excited about it. But like everything, it just takes time for people to A, learn about it, B, try and understand it, and then C, accept it. And I'm probably leaving out a very big D, which is what the motivation to do the other three, which is realizing that the system that they're currently in is not only not working very well, it's actually very detrimental to them and their families' financial health. I would have said long-term, but now I would say even short to midterm at this point, you know? So I think more people are getting excited. We see politicians, because they have to disclose, and I'm going to pick on the US, but it's probably happening all over the world. I know it's happening in Russia too, and Russia doesn't even want anything to do with Bitcoin, but politicians have to disclose their net worth when they take office and what holdings they have. And whether it's Russia, the United States, China, all of a sudden politicians are saying, oh, well, I have some Bitcoin, you know, as part of their disclosure when they take office. I find that fascinating. And these politicians don't even talk about Bitcoin necessarily, you know, but one of Biden's, Joe Biden's, President Biden's closest advisors, he's a young gentleman, probably in his early to mid 30s. Turns out he has $5 million worth of cryptocurrency. He had to disclose when they took office. And he doesn't even speak about it, you know. He's not pro Bitcoin or anything, you know. So I think it is starting to take hold when we start to see some of our so-called leadership getting involved in it. You see states like Wyoming, who basically have become the Bitcoin banking capital of the United States. You see states like Florida saying, we want to become the Bitcoin banking capital. Texas has said, the governor of Texas, we want to embrace Bitcoin. These are big, populated, powerful states. It's taking hold, but it does take time. And I think if we go back 10 years ago, it literally wasn't even on the radar. And now it's something that regular people are at least aware of, you know. I think 10 years from now, it'll be a pretty major part of discussion amongst regular people at lunch or dinner, you know. But I think there will be bumps along the way. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Well,
no,
I'm
just going to say, I think I'm a perfect example of that. Somebody that was aware of it, 6, 7, 8 years ago, but didn't really do anything about it for many years. And then finally the light bulb went off, and much like yourself, I was like, holy cow. But for me, the world that I lived in needed to start taking a turn that I thought this is not going to end well. What are our options? And that's when I started to really look around and say, oh, okay. You know, when governments spend more than they take in year after year after year, decade after decade, you don't need to be a mathematician to figure out that this can't last forever. So what do we do? What do we do in this world? And what do we do in this digital world? Oh, there is actually an option out there. So I just think it takes time for people to have the light bulb go off and motivation to have that light bulb go off. Something has to happen in their lives maybe to make them say, okay, now what?
I believe also, I mean, I heard about Bitcoin, I think a couple of years back when, you know, there was some news about, oh, this guy made several billion buying silly internet money. And I started reading a little bit blockchain. No, I can't be bothered. And then, you sort of like nudged me into that and said, you got to look at this. This is important. Like, you're a clever guy. Just start looking at it. Do it. Like this. So, okay. And then I started looking into some videos, and it took some time to really get into it. Of course, when you look at the charts themselves, how the value of Bitcoin develops, you go like, wow, what's going on? I got to look into that.
Right.
But it even took longer than to look also into the background, into the technical background. Even it took some time to buy this book and to read it. And it does require a little bit of education, like I don't know. It's a little bit like when you start to understand what are stocks and bonds. Like, that's the same process, right? For somebody who doesn't know what a stock is or a bond is, you know, it's difficult to get into that and then say, well, what do I have to do with this subject? I'm not a rich person. I'm not going to start, you know, brokering stocks or whatever. This is just for these rich people. So it's the same process. You sort of read up to it, you know, look some videos, you sort of understand how stocks are issued or how the stock market works and what's out there and what might be interesting for you. And here it's a new subject. Like you can't apply the subject of stocks and bonds to Bitcoin. It's a different kind of asset. It's also not gold. Like you might look into gold and, you know, how do I buy gold? And you tried buying gold and that didn't, you know, work out as you planned. And yeah, so what are gold mines and what are stocks and gold mines? And so you look into that. So it needs a little bit of an investment, yeah, in terms of time to wrap your head around it and then go like, oh, this is interesting. Like this is very interesting.
It does. Although I would say this though, unlike stocks and bonds and even gold or whatever, what I hadn't considered, and I think El Salvador is a great example. Where I saw in the news recently, Honduras is now looking at it. I have a friend who's married to a young man from Honduras. And these people like him, I'm not saying him specifically, but people like him, they're discovering Bitcoin. And this is why I said last week, or at least in our last discussion, why the price is exciting. I get that. And if you invested or bought or hold or whatever, it's difficult not to get excited about the price. But for somebody like him, they actually don't hold Bitcoin. They buy it to send it to help family at home. And so we talked a little bit about, you know, it cuts out the middle person. Well, traditionally, if he wanted to send money back to Honduras, $100, let's say, to help out his family, I don't want to name any institution, but we all know there's certain institutions you use when you need to send money, you know, to family in another part of the world. And whether that's your bank or one of these companies that wires money or whatever it is. Well, my understanding is, because I don't have to do that, knock on wood, but my understanding is that if he was to send $100, by the time he does that and the fees are taken in order to do that, he might be, the people on the other end, his family might be receiving 75, 80, maybe $85 of the $100. And so we talked about money equals time. So if he makes $20 an hour, it took him 5 hours of work now to make $100. But this middle entity, you know, whether it's a bank or one of these companies that wire money for you, they just took an hour's worth of his work just to facilitate that transaction, to send that money to his family. Now, with Bitcoin, people like him are discovering that, oh no, I can go buy $100 worth of Bitcoin. I can send it to my family in Honduras. Instead of them getting it 3 or 4 days after I filled out the paperwork and sent the money, they get it in 3 minutes. It goes straight into their wallet, and they received $99.99 as opposed to $80. So they're getting basically $100 of his $100. When he does it the other way, they get $75 or $80 of his $100. In a country like Honduras, that $20 difference can make all the difference between, you know, a comfortable few weeks and a very uncomfortable few weeks. So there's the investment angle to it. People like you and I would be discussing that, but there's a complete other angle to it of just removing the intermediaries and removing the middle people that just suck our time and our money, quite frankly, for no good reason, because in a digital world, we don't need these people anymore. You don't need the post office to send anything. You can use email. You know, doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them if you want to send a Christmas card or something, but you can also send a digital Christmas card. Well, you can't send digital money without somebody getting in the middle of that transaction, but you can with Bitcoin, you know. And when you're trying to help family who are less fortunate than you in another part of the world, that can make all the difference in the world, just cutting out that intermediary. So there's, and people like that, maybe, hopefully they look at it from an investment perspective, but even if they don't, and they don't want to put in the time, like you said, all they need to know is my 5 hours of work, which equaled $100, is now all 5 hours of that is now going back to my family. I think
Oh,
that's enough right there for a lot of people, you know?
right. Yeah, I haven't even thought about the potential. That's even more potential in terms of people buying Bitcoin for an actual use, right? So,
Right.
and the amount of people who could be interested in something what you're mentioning, I mean, there are millions. There are millions
Yeah.
of people who say, this is insane. Why am I paying these banking charges or these transaction fees? And when I can do the same thing, but to with much less. So that's a market argument right there. Why more and more people might catch on to Bitcoin and say, I'm going to use this stuff. So
Yeah.
I mean, there's still transaction fees when buying Bitcoin, though, right, and selling them.
Yeah.
So that you have to like take that into account. But still, overall, then you might do the math and say, still, I'm better off when I do it this way and send Bitcoin instead of US dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. And I haven't done it. So, but clearly the math is still works out in their favor because that's what these people are doing, and it's not just, I gave that example, but there's I don't know. It was a country in Africa. I want to say it's Nigeria, but it could be another one. It doesn't matter. But where they back in February, I think they wanted to ban Bitcoin, and so they banned Bitcoin, and by March they unbanned Bitcoin because they found that what happened in their population, which was already transacting in Bitcoin amongst each other, it rose, the transactions went up like 60% over the next 30 days. Like all they did was encourage more participation in the network by trying to ban it, because the people, they're not trying to be anti-government. All they're trying to do is survive, and that frictionless exchange was what they were actually using Bitcoin for. They weren't investing in it. Most of these people don't even know if they're going to have a meal tomorrow, but they were using it so that when they did exchange with each other, a lot of it wasn't being lost in that friction, in that middle entity, whether it be a bank or a credit union or whoever it is, taking a portion of their money in order to settle the transaction on the other end. Anybody that owns a business that has one of those, well, here they're called interact machines or debit machines, but every time we have $100 dinner bill, if we use that machine, the restaurant owner, they lose $3. They get 97 of the $100. $3 goes to whoever is allowing that process with the machine. I don't know, 3%. To me, that's just, in a digital world, I should be able to just go up to that restaurant owner and say, here's my digital $100, and he gets he or she gets my digital $100. It's my transactions between myself and the restaurant, not myself, a lending institution, and the restaurant. So whether I'll pick on Visa, MasterCard, whatever, they shouldn't be in between us in a digital era. I understand 20, 30, 40 years ago, sure, that was different. But now there's no reason for it. But we still have, even though we're in an internet world, we still operate financially as if we're, 1950, So I think that the Bitcoin solves many problems, as well as is probably the greatest, opportunity to have independence. I don't want to talk too much about the investment because you and I aren't investment experts or anything like that. But I do understand when people get excited when the price goes up. But I think there's a much greater use case for this globally. When you have almost 3 billion people on the planet that don't have access to banking. But they do have access to these intermediaries who take a pretty large sum in order to help them bank. I don't think that that's right. And in this day and age, we don't need the intermediary. So I think Bitcoin solves that as well. So it's multifaceted as to why people should look into it, I guess, is what I'm really saying. Yeah.
And although then many don't have access to banking, same goes for El Salvador. Like probably a lot of the rural population, they have difficulty getting access to banking. I would probably a lot of them still have something like this, right? So they have this and probably
Yeah.
have access to the internet. I mean, you can see that in a lot of these countries. People might not have a lot, but they might have that, and that gives them also the access to those kinds of transactions, which they also require. Like everybody has to probably interact some way, or do some
Yeah.
sort of payment or settlements. And yeah, it's
And
really
that's
a
something
shortcut.
I think that first world countries, definitely us in the West or Western countries, we don't even consider that. But I remember when a couple of years ago, Facebook was trying to launch their own Facebook type of currency, and the U.S. government, lost its mind. But one of the things I read from that was Facebook had done a study, and I don't want to give Facebook much credit because I certainly am not a big fan of that organization, but they had looked at the unbanked. And as you just said, it was like 2.7, 2.8 billion people. And it was like 80% of the adults, I'm not talking the children, of the unbanked had access to a cell phone. And so even, in the poorest countries, everybody's probably too strong. The vast majority of people who were over the age of 18 did have a cell phone. They did have access to the internet. So they might have to walk in bare feet 30 or 40 miles to get to the closest intermediary bank or Western Union or whatever. But they did have a cell phone. So even if they weren't concerned about the fees, it still was a half a day's walk to get to the intermediary in order to send or receive the money, right? Whereas if you have a cell phone, you just press send, so there's just and again, that was kind of Facebook's point. They weren't talking about Bitcoin. They were talking about something that they wanted to do. But the point is they had done the research before they, obviously before they wanted to launch this. It didn't get off the ground at that time, but the data was quite interesting. So, even if we forget about all of us who lived relatively privileged lives, there's still a third of the world that they would use this not to get rich, but simply to try and coexist with one another, to survive, from a financial perspective.
It's interesting that you mentioned Facebook, because I was just gonna raise the same example, but from a different perspective, because there's been now some rumors out that Twitter is now going to enable Bitcoin tipping through Bitcoin. Probably you heard about that. Of course, at this point, it's just a rumor. Although Jack Dorsey is a big supporter of Bitcoin, and it's fairly. I mean, it seems fairly likely that this is going to happen, which is also going to be huge. Like if Twitter, enables that. So what's the difference I was going to ask you, what's the difference if Twitter enables tipping through Bitcoin through having Facebook develop their own currency? What's the difference, and why was it a problem for them to get that? Why did they get slapped down when they said we want to have the Libra? Like, why would Twitter be able to do one thing when Facebook tried something else and wasn't successful in doing that?
Well, I don't know. You're probably leading me here, but that's okay. I'll take the bait. So the situation with Facebook is they were trying to, quite frankly, create their own Facebook currency. Now, I think at the time it was called Libra. I think it's changed names. They still haven't got it off the ground. And the problem with that is the government can then come in and say, no, you can't. And for all these reasons. Now, I remember at the time the hearings basically said that they didn't want to trust Facebook with any type of monetary system, even if it was one they created within their own little infrastructure. So we can debate whether that's good or bad or fair or not fair. That's irrelevant. The point is Twitter can do it because they're going to use Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, as we talked about a little bit in a previous session, there is no creator of Bitcoin to call up in front of Congress or some Senate subcommittee and threaten or lecture or spank or whatever. There's no post office box. There's no address for the corporate headquarters. It simply exists. And therefore, governments can't really do anything about it because there's nobody to hold accountable. So if Twitter wants to adopt Bitcoin, okay, but they can't, the government can't say, well, who's this Bitcoin company and do anything about it. It would, I don't want to make fun of it, but it would almost be like Twitter saying we're going to accept pizza. Like,
Oh.
you know, and not obviously there are many millions of pizza shops and they all have owners, so maybe it's not the best comparison. The government's not going to go after tens of millions of pizza shop owners one by one. Well, Bitcoin's even worse than that. It's hundreds of millions of people that, you know, are currently a part of that network, but nobody is in charge of it. So therefore, there's nobody to really threaten or spank or go after. So it's much easier for anybody, Twitter or anybody, to simply say, "Oh, I'm going to accept water now as a way to tip me, or I'll accept water as payment," or something like that. Like, it's water, you know. Or air or oxygen, whatever you want to call it. So the decentralized nature of Bitcoin, the fact that there is no individual or entity that's responsible for it, makes it virtually impossible to legislate or go after. You can regulate the use of it, but you can't regulate its existence.
So the point is that the United States still allows the use of Bitcoin. So you know, if a company decides like Tesla, okay, now we're going to take Bitcoin and tomorrow we're not, so that's fine. The US government isn't against that. And that's why Twitter can do that. Unless then you know, the government would have to say, well, no, that's over. You can't use Bitcoin for payment. We're going to shut this down, which happens in countries. In other countries, this has happened. And on the other hand, what I find interesting with the Facebook example is, so there's actually also you are allowed to develop an altcoin in the United States, right? You can set up a business and say, okay, now we're going to develop this thing called whatever, Libra or Coiny or Doji or whatever. And also US government doesn't forbid that, but they didn't like the fact that Facebook was going to do it. That's what they didn't like. They didn't like this huge internet giant now also developing its own internet currency, and that's the part which they said, no, you're taking it too far now. We're not going to have that.
Well, I think, you know, from a government's perspective, governments all over the world, quite frankly, I think companies like Facebook and Amazon and Google have gotten so large that they're almost, you know, and again, we're probably getting a little bit into the weeds, but I think they're becoming almost corporate governments of their own. Because let's face it, the United States has roughly, 350 million people. India has maybe 1.2 billion, China 1.4. Facebook has 2.8 billion people as part of their community, right? So they're actually larger than any country in the world if you want to just talk about their community. So I think it scares the heck out of governments all across the world when something as big as Facebook or Google says, we're going to create our own currency for our community, right? Because, you know, they probably think, oh my gosh, they could become the largest sovereign financial nation in the world within a very short period of time, right? And governments don't like to lose control, and finances is how I think most governments control their citizens, you know? So again, I guess we're getting a little bit off down the rabbit hole, but Bitcoin was invented to prevent governments from controlling, not because governments are evil or bad, but sometimes they just make mistakes, or sometimes they are evil. And when it comes to finances, you know, your money should not be used as a weapon against you. You know, I mean, look, I don't want to get into to geopolitical or foreign policy topics here, but regardless of what we think of certain countries personally, I don't think it's really fair that the United States used the global accepted currency of the US dollar as a weapon every time they disagree with somebody politically. Now, we could, you know, in the case of one country, we might say, no, that's totally fair. But in the case of another country, we might say, well, that's not really fair. Like, what have the Cubans ever really done to anybody in the last 50, 60 years? Other than the fact that they're a communist country. I mean, they've never shown any aggression towards anybody. I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that, but we here in Canada, we love Cuba. So it's where we vacation most of the time. Now maybe another country we would have an issue with, but I don't think weaponizing a dollar or finances makes any sense just because, you disagree with somebody politically, because we both lived long enough now to know that political friends and enemies, they change with the wind. I mean, it changes all the time. So I think finances should be left out of politics, I guess, and therefore governments should not probably be in control of them unless they're truly benevolent. Most governments aren't, they're benevolent to a point, I suppose. But so Facebook, I think, scared the heck out of a lot of people, particularly the United States, but I'm sure China, Russia would have freaked out as well. Whereas it's not that Twitter, if they adopt Bitcoin, I don't think these countries are going to be applauding it, but Twitter's not creating Bitcoin. Twitter's not creating another financial currency within its own network. It's simply adopting something that has already been ruled a commodity or an asset in the vast majority of countries in the West anyway. So I think in the United States, Bitcoin is a commodity. I'd have to check. It's either a commodity or an asset. So, and that's federally regulated. So that's fine. They're accepting something that's federally regulated as payment or as a way to tip content creators or whatever.
I mean, it's really something interesting if they now do that. Again, it's just a rumor, but with all the
Jack Dorsey, I mean, for those that don't know, he's the CEO of Twitter and co-founder and also the founder and CEO of Square, which is the second largest payment network in the United States. He believes 100% in Bitcoin. As a matter of fact, you opened the show today talking about mining. Jack Dorsey is running a full node. So he's actually one of the people doing the proof of work in the network itself. So he's one of the people verifying the work that the miners are doing. So he's very committed to the whole network. And Twitter and Square, both public companies, both hold Bitcoin on their treasury as part of their balance sheet. So I think the rumor is probably more than a rumor because the co-founder and CEO said that that's what we're going to do. He could probably get overruled at the board of directors, but Jack Dorsey, kind of like Steve Jobs, I don't think too many people on his board want to go against his wishes over something that probably doesn't matter that much to them one way or the other, but it matters a lot to somebody like him, So,
well, it's good if that happens. It's going to be massive in terms of the use, of course, but again, this question of people becoming interested in the topic. Like if you're able to tip in Bitcoin and people don't know what it is, they go say, "Well, I need to find out what it is because I can do this thing on Twitter."
Yeah,
you got to know what is that? Why? How can I get it?
And we're seeing, I'm starting to see, and again, I don't pay that much attention to the space, but of content creation, but I am just through my own anecdotal experiences, I'm seeing content creators that I pay attention to or follow or interact with sometimes. They're accepting Bitcoin or they're accepting NFT payments or something like that, and I asked somebody recently about that, and they said, "Oh, well, they weren't holding their Bitcoin. They were holding it what they could, but they needed to make a living. They were converting it into dollars, but the point for them was the fees worked out to quite a bit less. So again, much like our El Salvador example or Honduras example, they actually got to keep more of the dollars doing it that way than if you were to send them the money, which then got wired to their bank, and then they paid fees there, and then they had to get it from their bank. And so, that's interesting as well. And the other thing, the one lady said, when she accepts Bitcoin, it's settled almost immediately. Whereas if you send her $50 or $100 through the bank, it's 2 to 3 business days before they actually settle the transaction. So she actually doesn't get access to the money right away. So she said, just for convenience alone, it made more sense to do that. You know, if I got paid today by Luke, I could go out for dinner tonight. If I get paid today by Luke and the so-called normal financial system, I can't go out for dinner for 3 more days, 3 more business days. So if you pay me on a Friday, I can't go out until Tuesday or Wednesday, you know. So there's convenience, there's lack of fees, there's multiple reasons. There's investment, there's all kinds of reasons to take a closer look at this. Yeah.
And again, I think a lot of people are not aware. And I was just thinking, well, how do I do my transaction? So I use a lot of this, right? And then I went in my mind, well, okay, there's my bank and there's my credit card company, and then there is also Apple Pay. So I already have 3 intermediaries when I'm doing a payment. All 3, they all 3 need their cut. So, so I would be cutting out 3 intermediaries through this kind of transaction. Well, maybe I would need 1 because I might need a platform to do it or something like that. But yeah, I need 3 intermediaries to do a payment through my phone, and that's a lot. They all want to survive. They want to, pay their staff. And
and look, I don't think they're evil or bad. It's a business. Businesses tend to not be nonprofits. Right? That's why we have nonprofits. But at the same time, and I keep coming back to this digital world that we live in, your phone, if you have a wallet on your phone and I have a wallet on my phone, and if you don't know what a wallet is, it's okay. It's basically like an app. You can send me directly my money. There's no need for an intermediary because it's basically, and again, I'm speaking totally in layperson's terms, it's sent from one app to the other. It's like if you had 1,000 songs in your phone and I wanted those 1,000 songs, we just go and touch phones, right? The app takes care of it. We don't need Sony Music or Virgin Music or whoever to say, okay, well, we'll release 100 songs a day for the next 10 days once we make sure that the song's copyright. Stop it, like that made sense when we lived in a different world, So here we are, a couple of 50-somethings having this discussion. Can you imagine the concept of banking and sending money to somebody the age of 18 to 30 must be thinking, this makes no sense anymore. Like, why are we doing this? Why do I need to pay a bank $10 a month for the privilege of having a savings account?
I'm just reminded by these old phones where you turn a handle and say, operator, please connect me to
exactly. Yeah,
Roadview numbers. Okay, and I mean that's unthinkable nowadays, right? So you had this intermediary who'd had to do that service for you to find your connection, but who does that? Nobody. I mean,
exactly. So, and I hadn't considered that, but that's a great example actually, where it's not that was a bad thing. It's just it outlived its usefulness. Yeah. Technology replaced that. So we can do this now, and we're having a conversation internationally, not using a phone, and we can see each other. 30 years ago, that was called Star Trek.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. 40 years ago, well, maybe 50 years ago, it might not even have been Star Trek. So it's, again, I don't want to ever make it sound like these things that I'm criticizing were bad. They're simply irrelevant. That's all. So look, if I was a telephone operator from back in the day that connected the call, yeah, I might not be happy about it, but I'll go find something else to do. So when you ask about why did Facebook get slapped down, well, because governments have more power and banks have more power than that telephone operator, and they don't want to go find something else to do. But I believe that banks will still have a place, but it's not what they are today, and governments, we still need government. Well, some would say no, but anyway, we still need a state to some extent. So there's always going to be things for people to do, but their efforts might be put into other things than what they're currently doing, And so I think Bitcoin, it replaces those intermediaries. It reduces the friction. It reduces the fees. It could be a good investment. There's just many things. It can't be inflated. There's just so many things that you and I and all of us have to deal with in terms of going to work and getting paid and turning that into something that helps us survive. Bitcoin just makes that process easier, more efficient, and the end result is we become wealthier. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily millions. I'm just saying that even if you don't invest in it, but you simply use it, you'll become wealthier because the friction has been removed and you get to keep more of your money. You get to keep more of your earnings, you know?
What also convinced me when I read the Bitcoin Standard is this whole decentralized aspect of it. Like, this basically keeps it honest, and because the network members have an interest in verifying these transactions and these blocks, so you need a majority to verify a block, and therefore the whole system has a very high level of integrity, and it is very difficult to attack it from the outside or try to insert fraudulent information like faulty transactions and all that, because every network member has a high interest in keeping everybody honest. Right. Because if they don't, the whole thing fails and their work is for nothing, basically, which they invest into operating these nodes, as you say. And I thought, wow, that's interesting, because every central like every bank or any central institution, well, you have to always you have to have checks and balances in place and insurances to keep them honest from not cooking the books or running away with your money or whatever. So yeah, you need a government to keep banks honest, basically, or you need some other entities to keep them honest. Whereas the system keeps itself honest.
The system keeps itself honest. And it's funny, you know, and I look back now and I have to just laugh at the irony, but I hated math all through school. I didn't see what use it had. And the truth of the matter is, I'm still not sure what they taught us was all that useful. But math to me now, in a transparent system, you don't have to be a morally, ethically good person. Math takes care of that in a transparent system. So to your point, the network is completely transparent. The blockchain is transparent. So there can be no manipulation, not because I'm a wonderful human being, because the math would send out the red alert if I tried to manipulate it. And other good and bad people in the system would say, hey, right? Mm. So the math keeps everybody honest. And in a weird way, I've now come to realize it's probably the greatest gift that we've ever had, is the ability to do math. Mm. I can't do it on the level of scientists and astronomers and that kind of stuff. I can only do it to balance my household budget. But even that, if the system I'm operating in is transparent and everybody can see it, then the people keeping the checks and balances, they can't manipulate it either, because everybody can see it. And math becomes what used to be the bane of my existence, no pun intended. Now it becomes my greatest friend, because all of the time and effort that I put into making a living becomes much more fair and much more real and much more authentic. You know, and I hate to sound like I'm picking on government, but you know, here in Ontario about 15 years ago, we instituted it was a healthcare premium, is what it was called, and everybody was, depending on how much you made, but it was minimum was like $400 a year, extra fee, that extra tax that we had to pay, up to about $900. And you know, I was like, okay, well, it's healthcare, so that's a good thing. So fast forward a few years, and during the next election, it comes out that, well, they can't really find where all that extra money went, because it didn't go into a healthcare premium account. It went into general expenses. So it could have all gone to healthcare, but none of it could have gone to healthcare. We have no way of knowing, you know?
Right.
The blockchain takes care of that. If you want to institute a healthcare premium, no problem. We can see where all of the money goes, right? Oh, it's going to healthcare, right? You know, there used to be these, I don't know if they're true or not, but the urban legends about NASA, you know, their budget, you know, with a hammer costs $20,000, and they submit that to the State Department or the Treasury, you know. The blockchain takes care of all that. So at least it's real, and at least it's authentic, and probably curbs not only manipulation and corruption, but also mistakes. Maybe they didn't mean to pay $20,000 for that hammer, but they did. Oops, it was a ledger error. Well, that's removed because that simply can't happen. So there's just so much about the blockchain technology and Bitcoin itself that it makes sense. And if you don't want to go down the rabbit hole, that's fine. Like I said, it still ticks off so many boxes for the average person who might not even want to read about it. But you'll just look, it's more efficient. You'll save money. It removes inflation. It removes, like you said, the intermediaries, and you get to keep or 99% of your money in a transaction, as opposed to 75 or 80%. And I think for most people, if you just said that, they'd be like, oh, okay, well, where do I sign up? So I think whether it's from an investment standpoint or an ideological standpoint, or just from the standpoint of efficiency, I think that it will continue to move rapidly. I said last week, 2 million people a week now are coming onto the network. There's about 140, 150 million people globally. A year from now, it'll probably be about 250 million. A year from there, is it 350 or is it 500? I don't know, but it's happening. Countries are now making it legal tender. Other countries are looking at the possibility of looking at it. Countries like the United States are having battles in the Senate to try and regulate it in such a way that allows the industry to grow, or that they can tax, they get their pie too. That's fair, whatever. So I think
the case the book is making that's why it's called the Bitcoin standard, sort of like in reference to the gold standard, which was used for many years, is that and I don't know who's listening or watching, is the whole question how money is actually created as part of this book. So it's good also for that to read the book to understand where is my money coming from. And no, it's not the money which you put into your bank account, which is then given to somebody else. That's not how it works. And gold has nothing to do with it anymore because there is no gold standard, but there used to be a gold standard. And his case is a little bit like, well, maybe there could be a Bitcoin standard in the future because it's such a hard asset. And he even suggests that governments one day would buy Bitcoin just to have enough Bitcoin, in their treasury, because actually everything else, and this is the mind-boggling thing, everything else fluctuates against Bitcoin, basically. Like, because nothing is as hard as Bitcoin, like really nothing. There's nothing there. So you could stick Bitcoin and say, and everything else is sort of like weighed against that, and you could see the fluctuation against Bitcoin. Like you have something entirely stable, and you can track everything else against that, which is a wonderful, even like just thinking in very simple terms, like even if you measure something, you need some stability, like a centimeter or a yard, depending where you are in what country, but you have some stability. So you measure everything against that and say, this is my centimeter. This is my kilogram. This is my Bitcoin. So everything else is measured against that. What is the real value of this? Well, 0.004 Bitcoin. Oh, now I know. Thank you very much.
Well, I don't. I think that makes the most sense. And in time, he's probably right. And many people actually, I know, feel the same way that he does. I would go a step further. Now that I'm a C student in math all through high school. I now look at it and think, he could write, if he was so inclined, he could write another book called The Blockchain Standard, because really, at the end of the day, everything that we do in life should be measurable. So we should actually be using blockchain for many other things, not just, currency or investment or stuff like that. But to his point and to your point, I do think that probably sometime in the next 20 years, some countries, maybe many, will have a Bitcoin standard, because mathematically it makes far more sense than any other thing that we've used so far, including gold. Matter of fact, at this point, I would say especially gold. Everything else, I'm now starting to question what is real asset inflation and what is the devaluation of the dollar.
Mm.
You know, is Bitcoin really worth $50,000 US today? Or is, or is the US dollar simply against Bitcoin gone down so
Mm.
much in the
Mm.
last 10 years? I don't have the answer to that. Smarter people than I will be able to have an answer to that. It's probably nuanced, but you know, when you start thinking in terms of that, like you said, when you need to be able to have a baseline and a measurement and say, okay, well, this is what we're measuring against, you can't do that with dollars.
Mm.
It's simply impossible, because we've seen just in the last 18 months, we have 7 or 8 trillion US dollars pumped into the system that wasn't there 18 months ago. This is new. This isn't, you know, oh, in total. No, this is new. And that doesn't include all of the other countries that have also, Canada, I think it's about $1 trillion more than 18 months. No, Canada, our total debt 18 months ago was $300 billion, which was a lot actually for our population. Now it's $1.3 trillion. Like, this is all new money into the system. So there's nothing to measure any of this stuff against. So, you know, I don't know, is asset, and this is the argument where, I don't know if you've paid attention to it, but there's a lot of talk about, oh, the rich are getting richer. Well, a big reason for that is all the money printing. Because if you own a home, and look, let's face it, I can't speak for Europe, but here in Canada, most homeowners are not wealthy people. They're people that have mortgages, you know, they don't own their homes outright. But from an equity perspective, any homeowner has increased their net worth 20, 30, 40% as far as the home goes in the last 18 months, not because they've done anything. It's because so much money has been pumped into the system that assets are inflating in value. Now, the flip side of that is, if they sold their home and took the proceeds, they could not go buy a better home because everything else has gone up as well, right? So that's why I say it. I'm wondering, like, is Bitcoin really at $50,000, or is the US dollar simply worth less and less and less, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
So
that really is a mind bender, actually, to think of exactly in the opposite. Like, what exactly is going on right now? Is Bitcoin appreciating, or is just the dollar depreciating? So what's happening?
I think it's probably both. I think because Bitcoin is still a young network and growing, it is appreciating. But I also think that, you know, let's face it, the global reserve currency is the US dollar, and it is devaluing. There's no question about that. You know, so we probably got way off of our well, I guess this was just discussion, but these are the kind of things that I started to think about in the last couple of years. And when you think about it from that perspective, and you think about your time, because that's what you're giving in exchange for money. I don't care what job you do, you're giving your time. And when you think about that, then inflation to me is time theft. You know, that's where I was coming from with that, because your money is being devalued, therefore your time is actually being devalued and taken from you. You know?
And a lot of people also don't seem to understand. Like, some people have then a fundamental understanding of economics. Both of us are not experts, but the point being, which you're making, is that perhaps some people look at the inflation rate and say, oh, okay, 2.5 or 3%, you know, whatever. And then you go like, and you know, this is not a problem. You say, hang on, what about the hidden inflation? They go, what do you mean hidden? Well, for example, assets and real estate, like that's not factored, in many cases, not factored into the consumer price index, right? So which makes up then the inflation rate of 2.5%, bad enough as that is. And then you say, well, what about the real estate prices in the last 3 years? Did you notice something? And they go like, actually, yes, I did. The stuff is really, I mean, I can't even afford to buy something right now. I said, well, there you go. That is your opportunity being inflated away of the middle class building any, you know, midterm or sustainable wealth. That's the only chance the middle class has of building any wealth, is buying property. You're not going to,
I think,
yeah, you're not going to build wealth by buying an iPhone, that's for sure. Like, that's not so. If you're robbed of that opportunity because there's so much money being thrown into the market, which is cheap money, you know, because people are not paying interest rates anymore, or big, you know, this is being sucked up by huge real estate companies, which of course get easy access to that money because they have a lot of collateral, and they dump it right back into the real estate market and suck everything up. And so the little guy goes like, what's going on? Why can't I afford anymore to buy a home? Something happened. I don't know what.
And you know, the this is where I pick, and I do have friends that are socialists, believe it or not. And now, you know, they're starting to come along to my way of thinking, you know. So you say, well, homes are getting more expensive. The middle class can't buy a home. Well, what happens when homes get more expensive? Landlords didn't buy homes to run non-for-profits. So if you know, and again, you don't have to be some really rich person. You could be just a family that had a little bit extra money, so they bought a second home and they're planning on renting it out, you know. Well, it cost them X amount more to buy that home. So what they were willing to rent the home for 5 years ago has now gone up the same percentage. Right. It's now 30, 40, 50% more expensive to rent. And people that are renting think, oh, the greedy landlords. Oh, the landlords had to pay 50% more than they did 5 years ago. Right. They're just trying to recoup their costs. So the trickle down of this, oops, I just used the word trickle down. Reaganomics, I didn't mean to bring that up. But the trickle down effect of the inflation steals time and money all the way down the line, right? It is the most insidious hidden tax in history, in my opinion, and it's brilliant. I give governments and central banks full credit. We're the people that need to wake up, not them. They know what's happening. You know, right. Like you said, I don't know about Germany, but in Canada, and the United States, the actual home price is not included in the CPI. There is a formula that they use, but that's not the price of the house. So why is that not included? Because if it was to be included, it makes the CPI not look very good anymore.
Well, it's the same here.
Right. Okay. So there you go. So that's where the regular person, like you said, like you and I, who normally wouldn't look at this stuff, if the inflation rate's 2, 2.5, whatever. But if it was all of a sudden 6 or 7, we'd be like, hey, what's going on? And we'd start asking questions. Well, you know, they don't want the masses to ask questions, right? However, you know, when conspiracy theorists say that the path of Western governments is to get to the point where you'll own nothing and be happy, it's not some you know, Star Wars galactic empire that's going to come in and round us all up. Inflation will do that for us, right? Because pretty soon you won't be able to buy a home unless you're rich. And pretty soon you're not even going to be able to afford to rent a home. And then the government will come in and save you, and they will give you, you know,
universal basic income.
Yeah, whatever, right? So, and eventually you get to the point where, okay, well, you don't own nothing and you'll be happy. You know, it's just, anyway. Yeah.
Then you have somebody breathing down your neck, checking that you're fulfilling certain regulations to deserve a universal basic income to pay your rent. So, you know, to conform to a certain type of behavior or whatever. So it's same already with any sort of, like, you know, unemployment or anything where you have to justify why you're getting it and what you should do to deserve it. And so there's always a UBI doesn't come with certain obligations. That's what I'm trying to say. There's no free lunch. So even if the government says this is your free lunch, it's not going to be free. The government's going to ask you for something in return for the free lunch.
I don't know a ton about this, but I understand the basics of the social credit score in China, which basically, you know, if you do something that, you know, goes against the Communist Party of China's idea of what they like, maybe you show up at a protest for human rights, which most of us would think is fine. You just got docked, and your universal basic income is only going to be 60% of what it was last month, unless you want to change your attitude about how you go about life.
Right, so, sure. And you've already signed that agreement then and said, okay, yeah, I see your point, you know. Yeah. One last question to Bitcoin Standard. I mean, he's also, what's in the book is this, that the transactions which can be done by the blockchain and the network are limited. So that he sort of defines that as one. let's say, I don't even know if he calls it a weakness or anything. I sort of like went like that. That's interesting. Like you said, the way it's currently set up with the block size and the verification by the network members. And so it's very secure, it's very stable, but it comes at a price. And the price is that the number of transactions is limited. And if you go like, well, if this is going to be like a national, like a global standard of payment, then maybe that's not possible. He already points towards something saying, or we already know about these second layer applications. But yeah, maybe you want to say something about that as well, because maybe people hear about Bitcoin and then somebody says, oh, but the number of transactions are limited. This is not going to go anywhere. But yeah, this.
Yeah, there's definitely there's truth to that. But what I would say is this: the book was written and published in 2018, which means it was written in 2017 or earlier. And I'm not a coder, but technology moves quickly. So here we are, 2021. There's a second layer system or technology underlying that called the Lightning Network. It can process more transactions than Visa can in any second of any day. So that concern, fast forward 3 or 4 years from the time that book was published, has already been eradicated. Bitcoin and the nature of the Bitcoin network, the more people that join it, actually, the faster the transaction happens. But we're already at the stage now where everybody on the planet could transact in Bitcoin, and you would still be able to settle your transaction in seconds. Yeah. So that's not, if it was a large transaction, if we were sending, actually, I just saw this last week, 2 transactions of over $1 billion from one account to another were done on the network. They took less than 10 minutes to settle. You couldn't settle $1 billion in the fiat system in less than probably 10 days because, 18 different banks and institutions and government anti-money laundering and everything, like it would just be a nightmare, not to mention the technology couldn't handle it. So that concern about the blockchain only being able to do so many transactions, that's already been solved. There's an underlying layer of technology that takes care of that now. But at the time that book was done, I don't think that was the case. Because the book is about 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of these altcoins, as far as I know, were even developed to ensure a higher number of transactions. But and some of them are being used, but not to the extent of Bitcoin. And yeah, the Lightning network definitely is growing and being used now for that, and really taking off to take care of these higher number of transactions. So yeah. So I don't know. What do you think we should we call it a day? I think we've been at it again for almost an hour, but it was really interesting today to talk about these things like energy use and again the question of the intermediary. We really went into that, and as you said, I mean, I didn't really think of it this way, that a lot of people they want to use it. It's not just I want to buy it and keep it and okay, that's an interest, but they really need it, and that there's so many people in this world who really need a solution like this. They really they're desperate for any sort of solution, and so all the benefits, number of benefits we talked about, that was really interesting.
Yeah, I guess I would sum up to that and just say it wouldn't surprise me if it's not the West, but actually the third world that brings Bitcoin into the mainstream on a global perspective.
Right.
I'm not saying that'll happen. Maybe it will be the West as from an investment standpoint, but I actually think it'll be the third world countries that will do it globally for the reasons that we discussed.
And El Salvador now was the first country to take that step, and who knows who's how's that. We'll see how it develops, or if other countries are going to take this. Maybe everybody's watching that now and trying to figure out what's going to happen.
I think
to
there
them.
are a lot. I mean, when you look at a Lebanon, an Argentina, any of the South American countries, the answer to all of that, I don't care which country it is, the answer to their problems, the African nations, it all comes down to the same thing, Bitcoin, right? Because at the core of all of their issues is inflation and the unbanked. Those are the two major problems that those countries have. And Bitcoin solves both of those problems.
Yeah, and being dependent also on foreign currencies to trade. Like they are dependent on the euro and the US dollars to do any sort of trade. And that comes with a cost and with obligations, and they have to have access to these currencies. Otherwise, that's it. They can't engage in trade. And yeah, so that was an interesting conversation today. Once again, thanks a lot for that.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. See you soon. See you in the next one.
All right. Sounds good.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.